they train rats to detect tuberculosis by scent. So they use sort of behavioral conditioning to do this. And I just thought, wow, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. They also, I found it so interesting. They also, they train them to detect landmines and things like that as well, so that they can clear, fields basically for people to use and grow crops. Um,
Wow.
yeah, really cool. They're actually more accurate than traditional methods of doing this as well. So that's why they're so important.
Welcome back to the Data Strategist podcast. And today's guest is Robin Andrews, who is a data scientist at Health and Her. And, we cover her career, which is really fascinating, from where she started from to getting a PhD and becoming a data scientist, and the amazing data that she works with and some of the amazing things she's done. And it's really interesting to hear about someone's trajectory into this industry that hasn't gone through sort of your normal routes. So going through doing your A levels, doing your degree, then going into data, and then doing a PhD. Her career trajectory and her career path is very different to that. And it's absolutely amazing and quite inspiring, actually, for people who have, kind of want to do a career change or haven't really found what they want to do, but they really enjoy data science or research themselves. So it's absolutely really key for anybody to listen. We talk about why she picked data science as well. And some of the challenges that she faced and some of the skills that you've got to learn as part of moving from academia to industry. We also have a little chat about some advice you would give to anybody who is just starting out as well. And finally, we cover off some of that data ethics and AI. And I think it's really important for us as data colleagues, people, whatever we want to call ourselves, to have those discussions. It doesn't matter how far you are in your journey, whether it's at the beginning, like Robin in her data science journey, or whether it's, talking to someone like Pete last time around where he is in his career, start founding his own company. So I think it's really important that we all sort of discuss these things and have that sort of general discussion, no matter where we are in our career. So I just want to say thank you to Robin again. It was a really interesting podcast and fascinating to hear sort of her journey into data science. And, the future looks amazing for Robin. And, I wish her all the best. And thank you very much for coming on. So here we go. Let's just jump straight in. Okay, so here we are on the Data Strategist podcast, and today's guest is Robin. So I'm not going to introduce you because you can do that yourself. So over to you.
Hi, so my name is Robin Andrews, and I'm a data scientist that works for a company called Health and Her. So Health and Her is a female health company which specializes in treating women with menopausal symptoms. I also work for Cardiff University in a postdoctoral scientist role on a project analyzing population health data.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about your career so far? Because obviously you work at Health and Her, but what's led to that? How did you get to Health and Her?
So it was all a bit on accident, to be honest with you. So I was a mature student when I went to university, and I started doing an undergraduate psychology degree. I don't have the best academic background before university, so I didn't get good A levels, I didn't get good GCSEs, or I think, yeah, in fact, I failed my A levels. So I managed to get into university with work-based qualifications, being a care worker. So I think I had like
Okay.
an MVQ or something in health and social care. And so I knew sort of early on in my degree that I loved science. I loved research. I really wanted to do a PhD. I was desperate to do one, in fact. So I found out about this company where I could potentially get research experience to boost up my CV, basically, and, make it more likely I'd get accepted onto a PhD project. So during the summer of my undergrad degree, I harassed a company called Apopo. So Apopo is a company based in Africa, in Tanzania. They train rats to detect tuberculosis by scent. So they use sort of behavioral conditioning to do this. And I just thought, wow, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. They also, I found it so interesting. They also, they train them to detect landmines and things like that as well, so that they can clear, fields basically for people to use and grow crops.
Wow.
Yeah, really cool. They're actually more accurate than traditional methods of doing this as well. So that's why they're so important. So I harassed this company. They eventually yielded, and probably to get me to shut up. And they gave me a little 2-month role analyzing data. And this is where I developed a phobia of Excel because it, I'd never analyzed anything in my life really before. And it was 30,000 rows of wrap data on Excel. It kept crashing, it kept deleting. It was horrendous. Pretty sure I cried about 50 times a day. Um, but in the end, when we finally prepped this massive data set and we got it into SPSS, which is what I used to test it and all of that, we found some really interesting distinctions between male and female rats and their accuracies. And I just loved the journey from start to finish, like discovering something new, basically. Even though it's frustrating getting there, it's just great getting that end result. So I loved that. And it was that role that actually got me accepted onto my PhD project, because that project ended up being really data science heavy.
Mm.
And yeah, so that PhD project was sponsored by my current employer, Health and Her, who are known for collecting large amounts of digital data from their website and their app. So it gave me a lot of experience, basically, analyzing massive data sets.
Wow.
Um,
So that then you went, so you did, what was your PhD in then?
Oh, sorry. So, yeah, my PhD was in health psychology. So, the project involved evaluating an online symptom checker to assess whether it was beneficial for women with menopausal symptoms. Um,
Wow.
so, this involved like digital data collected from the Health and Her website and developing like randomized controlled trials to see whether symptom monitoring could be beneficial.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. So was that generating sort of like surveys? So they would just have a survey, you would go onto their website, fill out the survey with your symptoms, and then it would determine the next
Yeah,
course of action, essentially, or
pretty
recommendation?
much. Yeah, so that's exactly
Wow.
it. So they had like they've still got it, I think. It's a symptom checker. So it'll have a list of sort of 16 menopausal symptoms. You type in which ones you've got, and then it will give you solutions for, the next steps, basically. So it was
Wow.
basically having a look at what that sort of psychological effect it had on people.
Wow. That's amazing. And now you're still with that company. So you finished your PhD, you're still with Health and Her. What's
Yeah.
what's going on now? What are you doing now at Health and Her?
So a lot of what my role involves is evaluating the app data that Health and Her generates. So looking at insights among menopausal women who are using their app, or perimenopausal women as well, and just looking at ways that we can innovate, basically, make the lives for these women a lot easier. See if there's ways we can help them. I also do a lot of like business data alongside our head of finance as well. So, which is not something I've ever done before, but it is interesting
So
looking
you're
at
doing
things from
more
there.
you're doing more analytics on that side as well, rather than
Yeah,
pure data science stuff. You've got data science to look at all the health data, and then you're doing some analytical work as well on
yeah,
like the corporate side, if you like. Well, it
yeah.
sounds like a
That's it.
really fascinating role. Um, so obviously, when you were doing your PhD, we had a quick chat before this, and you had a baby during your PhD. That's a kind of a crazy thing to do. Add a bit of
Yeah,
pressure on yourself. Why not?
exactly, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, casually had a baby halfway through my PhD. That that brought quite a few challenges, shall we say? But he's still alive. You'll be pleased to know. So
Well, there you go. And you managed to get a PhD, so that's a
yeah.
double win there. Um, so we did have a quick chat of here around the fact that you work with this type of data. Does it sort of influence yourself and what you do on the health wise? So obviously you have mass amounts of information about people. Um, you gather data from various different sources. And once you're reviewing it, does it have that sort of impact on yourself when you're thinking about this sort of stuff, or do you make life decisions because of the things you've seen?
Yes. So, yeah, I think the decision to have a baby halfway through my PhD was definitely influenced by researching the menopause, because obviously the menopause describes like the permanent end to fertility. Um, so obviously your life clock or reproductive clock is, usually for most people over there somewhere, whereas mine was, with me all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
It's an
it definitely
interesting
had an
thought, isn't it?
impact. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad I did it though. Definitely glad I did it when I did.
Yeah, I think that's huge, right? When you think about us as sort of data people, we get to see sort of the the raw truth of things that are happening, and then if we see something, does it have an impact on what we do? And obviously, yours was pretty life changing decision to do, right? But even just with other sets of data, if you're thinking about it and you research something and you're like, whoa, this could happen. It's happened to so many people. I need to make a decision about my health or my life because of what could happen. That's kind of a really sort of an interesting thought path of data people, data scientists, data engineers, data analysts, all of us, um, and how we think about our lives based on the data we see day in day out. That's kind of a, you know,
Yeah.
it's an interesting sort of thought. I've never really thought about it, to be honest, because I've usually not worked in data apart from the last 3 years around stuff that could impact me. It's more kind of cool tech stuff, kind of not really impacting stuff. Like when you think about telemarketing or sort of advertising, you kind of know that thing. Like Facebook knows everything about you, Experian knows everything about you. And you're kind of thinking, well, yeah, that's kind of cool data. But working with health data, that's another level to life decisions, shall we say.
Yeah, definitely. It can be a good thing as well though, I guess. So if you're looking at health data, it does make you think more about your health, I suppose. So you're
Mm.
thinking, if I take these steps now, then I'm less likely to, I don't know, have X, Y, and Z in the future. Although that being said, I definitely like do my fair share of health risk behavior now and again. Like it's a yeah, consequence of the position, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So why I think we kind of touched a little bit on it, but why data science? Because obviously you did research, but then moving to data science is kind of another level of research because research has data in it, but applying sort of mathematical algorithms to data is kind of another further step. So why data science?
I don't, but honestly, it wasn't my intention. My intention was to, be a psychologist or whatever, go into research, work for a uni. I suppose I ended up in data science kind of the same way most people do. It's like an accident, isn't it, really? Um, but it's such but, it's such a broad area. So a lot of what I do is, very much on the analytics side. I do build quite a few models and things like that, but it's mostly analytics at the moment, just exploring large data sets and seeing, what's in them. What do they mean? What does it say about this population and what are these characteristics and things?
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I suppose going back to what I was saying earlier, I love doing this job just because it's the discovery. It's finding out new things that haven't been found out before. That's what I
mm.
really enjoy.
The curiosity of it all, kind of
Yeah.
you keep digging and digging and digging and finding out something new. Yeah, that's kind of you do get a dopamine hit from it, right? You
You
kind of get
do.
that sort of like, wow. It's the same with analysts. Analysts get it. Engineers get it when they see something that's moved from point A to point B at a
Yeah.
really fast speed at a low latency. They're like, whoa, this is really cool. And it kind of just gives you that dopamine hit. And people that don't do this job probably don't understand it when we go, that bar chart is awesome, right? They don't
Yeah.
quite get the satisfaction and they don't understand it. We all look a bit weird when we say it. Even saying it out loud, I feel a bit weird saying it. But in
But
general, that's what people feel
yeah.
like.
Well, it's watching your code just, working through the screen, and it's so therapeutic watching a code that doesn't go, like halfway through. Like, it's
Yeah,
the
yeah, the
best
coding.
feeling
Yeah,
in the world.
yeah, man, that is really good. I like that That is sort of like, oh God, it's one of the worst feelings ever when it errors and you don't know why. And you're
And it's
like,
usually because you've like slept on your keyboard or something like earlier in the day,
yeah.
or your cats walk past. Yeah.
It's usually something trivial and you can't see it for a good couple of days. You've got to walk away,
Oh,
come back, and it's like,
yeah.
I didn't mean for that comma. That's,
Yeah. I've
yeah.
accidentally copied and pasted my shopping list in there. Like, yeah.
So, okay, so you're a data scientist, you've got your PhD. What are sort of like and you're relatively new into this field, right? You've been doing it for a
Yeah.
couple of years now, but what are sort of the challenges that you faced sort of early on in your career?
So I don't know if this is a challenge or just a sort of situation, but I work kind of smack bang in the middle of academia and industry. So with industry, obviously, they're like this is amazing for research and innovation and like giving like the end user really good insights and really good products. And it's a very quick way of getting these products and insights to the end user, the person that could benefit most.
Mm,
But with industry, obviously, businesses have to be kept afloat. They have to stay prosperous in order to keep generating these innovations. Um, so their sort of position is like they have to maintain that their business looks good, that it's like,
yeah.
like they don't reveal anything that is too personal to the business, in case sort of competitors get a wind of it. So there are limitations to what can be disseminated and what can't be disseminated with industry. Whereas with academia, the position is very much, well, or should be, should I say, it's very much science has to be sort of reproducible, it has to be objective, and you have to try and keep it as close to the truth as possible.
Mm,
Um, so you could see how like academia and industry, they both come into conflict there because industry's main concern is keeping, industry alive, whereas academia's concern is finding the truth.
yeah. Yeah.
um, so that's somewhat of a challenge for me, is navigating and upholding, the requirements of both sides of those sectors, really.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because I think you are right. In academia, you are really there to share ideas and share your thoughts on how you went about doing something. And in sort of private sector or industry sector, you are kind of building sort of intellectual property for a
Yeah,
company. It's a really different viewpoint to look at it. That's fascinating. I think that's hard to navigate as well. Like it is really just it's a mindset in one essence, but also I think it's more how do you validate what you're doing if you can't validate it with anybody else, a competitor,
yeah.
say, or anybody else in this field? That's never really thought about that. You kind of put a lot on me today that I've not really thought about. This is pretty fascinating. I think that's what about sort of data quality? Does that have an impact in any way to your so far in your career? Because that's usually the one that everyone goes, ugh, data quality. It's the worst.
Yeah, so obviously when I'm working with health and her data, our data is only as good as what people input into the app.
Mm,
And there are limitations to what we can collect about people and what we can do, with the data and stuff. Um, like, I rely on the way that the data is fed into our, AWS as well. So
mm.
there are many times where I'm like, this doesn't look 100% right. And, stuff like that. So you have to learn quite a lot about like sort of the background behind how that data came from the app into AWS. I do work quite closely with our data engineer and the developers and things, and I'm constantly like, what does this mean? What's this variable? Like, things like that. But it's been interesting. It's actually, you know, I've gone from like in my PhD just developing surveys and having very nice flat data to
Mm.
obviously like in the last couple of years dealing with tables and databases and like all sorts of things. So yeah.
I think that's right. What get when you start working in this industry is you're not just dealing with data, you're dealing with other specialisms and what people do. So, like you said,
Yeah.
you have to go chat to a data engineer. How did that data come from the app to this data source? How did it get there? And then you've got to go work with the developers to go, yeah, but why is it acting this way? And then you've
Yeah.
probably got stakeholders that you have to work with to go, well, actually, I couldn't produce this, or this is what the app is doing. And you're kind of like the front of that then, rather than the developers and the engineers at the back end, because people go, well, you said it was not working properly. Why isn't it? You're the now responsible. So that's another good thing about working in data. But one of the challenges I would say working in data is you are the front and center of when data doesn't look right.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the people inputting it. No one talks about them. It's not necessarily the developers, because the developers have developed a product, we've done something. And it's not really the engineers, because the engineers just move data from one to point B. So it is kind of yourself or data analysts or data scientists who are at the forefront of that. And it's you've got to learn quite a lot of soft skills. That's kind of one of
You
the big
do.
aspects.
Yeah. And obviously, I think I get asked, like, can you do this? Can you do that? And oftentimes the answer is no, but I can do this instead. So
Mm,
it's all problem solving, isn't it? It's,
yeah,
from coding to, figuring out how to get around something. Like, you just have to sit and problem solve for a while and just do a lot of thinking.
that is pretty much it. Yeah, problem solving where somebody hasn't done something else. That's kind of what the general gist of what data scientists or data analysts have to do. If someone else hasn't done their job or data hasn't been inputted correctly, we've got to try and make it look right, which is an interesting sort of anecdote to what it's like. So that's your challenges. But what have you learned so far? What have you learned so far, and what are your biggest achievements, or what are you proud of as well? So we'll start off with what have you learned so far in the couple of years you've been
Um,
working here?
so I've learned to work like quite closely with different areas of the business. So I've worked with, oh, sorry, my cat's coming in, so it might get a bit noisy.
All good.
He gets rowdy. Um, yeah, so I've worked with different areas of the business. So from like, the product development stage, so looking at like, relevant research within like the field of ingredients and things like that, which has been like obviously not very data sciencey heavy, but very research heavy, I guess, which is part of my job really, is doing like a lot of reviews of available evidence and then trying to confirm this with the data that we hold. So that's been interesting. The financial data and things, and just working in a professional environment. So because I previously, before I went through uni for 6 years, I was a care worker. I'd never been in a professional role or an officey type role. So
Mm,
words like KPIs I'd never heard of before until like a couple of years ago. So I'd be sat during meetings hearing all these like like acronyms and thinking,
yeah,
gonna have to Google that one. I don't have a clue.
yeah. People talking about
So
North Star metrics and yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
like what are these things? Because business isn't, it's a very new area to me.
mm,
It's interesting, and it's important, but yeah, it's new. Is
yeah.
I guess what I'd say.
So what's your biggest success that you've done so far, apart from having a baby and a PhD and a full time job? Forget all those, right? They're small incremental things, right? What's your biggest success with data in particular so far?
Um, I suppose like, yeah, my favorite one is probably, I've done a recent study which is hopefully going to be published in BMJ soon if they finally review it, um, which was analyzing the Health and Her app data, using like a longitudinal cohort and assessing whether the app was associated with improvements across 2 months. So it's like, it was quite good to do this because it needed like a big assessment of what like the limitations and things with the Health and Her data. So I conducted like a linear mixed effects model and went through the process of like, um, yeah, developing a study which showed that the app had benefit. This enabled the app to increase its ORCA score. So ORCA is a basically an authority which evaluates healthcare apps, and it basically rates them. And the higher your rating is, the more likely the NHS is to recommend it to their menopausal patients, pretty much. So conducting this study increased our ORCA score to 86%, I think.
Oh,
Sorry,
wow.
my
Okay.
cat. Which was, really,
That's quite a
really good for
proud
the
thing
company.
to, yeah, well, the company's one thing, that's the industry, but for yourself, that's quite an achievement, right? To be able to put that badge on to say, look, I helped achieve this, or I did that through research, data, curiosity, all these things, and that's amazing. You should be really proud
Oh,
of that.
thank you. Yeah, it
I
took
think that's awesome.
ages.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort. God,
Yeah.
yeah. It's one of the
Well,
best things I did, but it took a while.
yeah. Well, AWS broke about halfway through, so I think
Ooh,
our yeah. So, like,
that's not
every
good.
day I'd be like, "Oh, how's it going? Is it fixed? Is it fixed? What's going on?" Like, so yeah, that was the worst part, I think, but yeah,
Oh,
got it up and
wow.
running now.
That's amazing. Um, so you're relatively new into this sort of area. Is there anything that any sort of advice that you could give to somebody who's just starting out? Like what would you ask? What would you say to somebody who's like, I want to become a data scientist, or I want to do, well, let's do data science first, and then maybe let's do PhD second.
Yeah, I'd say, I guess, for both things, really. If you don't have an amazing academic background, like, you don't have like the best, GCSEs or A levels or whatever, don't let that put you off if data science is something that you really want to do. I think it's actually one of those very rare careers where your skills and your portfolio will speak much more, like will hold more weight basically than your qualifications do.
Hmm?
So it's definitely something that, is like a learnt skill that you can build and build over time. Like you don't need every accolade or whatever you know, to get into it. I think there's a lot that you can do yourself online as well to learn. And yeah, so it's like I think it's something that everyone can pursue if they wanted to,
Mm.
basically. Um, with a lot
Yeah,
of, hardship in between. Don't get me wrong, but
you are right. I think it is one of those skills that you can build over time. And it's not something that you need to have a degree in. I think degrees help, right? There's
yeah.
definitely
Oh,
it allows you to have that fundamental view of how things work. I think it definitely helps, but it's not the be all and end all. I think the right attitude for someone who's just starting out is probably worth way more than what their academic background looks like, especially if you're
yeah.
going into an industry field. You know, academia is just kind of a way to filter people to make sure that you're not getting anybody walking through the door. It's a so okay, well, I've got 10 applicants, 8 of them have got degrees. I can whittle down to 8. And then it's kind of used in that way rather than personality sort of
Yeah.
shining through. Um, so I think there's so much material out there now as well. Like YouTube is full of you know, how-to guides, what to do, and then you got the likes of ChatGPT will just be like, "Hey, here's your code, here's your error. Thanks. I can go and do my job now."
Yeah.
It there's so much there's a low entry into the sector as well. So if you pick up the right skill set, like you said, you could get a job, a junior-based job anyway, really, and
That's
remote working
yeah.
helps.
Yeah, this is it. Because I think, with the PhD journey, I was very lucky. I was heavily supported by my supervisors who were amazing throughout. Um, but like there's a high drop-off rate with PhDs, which is something no one really talks about. And I think if anyone's sort of, they've been in a position, maybe they've like been in a project and they've dropped out and they think all is lost. I think, data science, if that is something that they want to pursue, all hope isn't lost. Like they don't need to be their mistakes, basically.
Mm, wow, that's pretty good. I like that. So what does the what's the future hold for you then? You've just are you looking to become sort of principal data scientist, or really hone those data science skills or move into analytics maybe? Because most people will start in one field. I've met plenty of people who started as an engineer, moved to analytics, analytics to engineer, analyst to data scientist, scientist to engineer. We kind of move around within those sort of three roles. Well,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on it?
I honestly, I don't know. I love the field of healthcare, so public health is my bread and butter. I love, I like the idea of doing something that could change, the world and all that stuff. Um, so whatever I do, I think it would be analyzing medical data, continuing to, hopefully write studies. So have sort of a foot in the door with academia to a certain extent. Don't really see myself teaching or anything like that, or, I just yeah, I'd like to just continue doing research really, and whether that means being, a data scientist or, something a bit more broad, it doesn't really bother me as long as I can continue doing what I'm doing really. I'm quite happy.
Is it the output that you enjoy the most? So once you've done the research, because that's a process in itself, but then when you do the conclusion, is that your dopamine hit then? When you see other people read that conclusion, or when you found something that is absolutely mind-boggling, or yeah, what do you think? What is
It's
it?
the dopamine here, it usually comes analyzing the data. So that's the best part because obviously you can write your methods and like have your hypotheses and stuff, but you don't necessarily know what you're going to find. And sometimes you find an absolute gold mine of a thing that
Hmm.
you'd never thought of and certainly no one else had ever thought of. So that's the best part, is just being like, whoa, that's mad. I can't believe I'm seeing this. And
What
then
about when
you
you share it though? Like when you share that, does that give you any sort of like, look at this, guys, look at this, everybody? Does that give you anything?
No, it's such an annoying process. It's crap. So, like, do you mean so? Obviously, yeah. When you share with like your team and stuff, that's great. That's and everyone goes, "Oh wow, that's so cool," and we
Yeah.
talk about it and stuff. But it's the process of actually publishing research and things. It just it goes on and you get peer reviewed and then they send it back to you and then you've got to write something and then you send it back and then they send it back and it goes on for months and it's just
Yeah, that
by the
probably
time
kills the fun.
you get so sick of reading it, you're like, I don't even care now. just just get it away
Just,
from me. I'm
uh,
fed up of looking at it. You
I've
just want to
already
go on
written
to the
my other one.
next.
I've already written the
Yeah.
other one. I don't
Yeah.
care about this one. Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I didn't really think about the peer review stuff. I've not done so myself. I've not done any sort of academic type papers or work like that. So that's kind of a yeah. I didn't really think about the amount of review you would have to undertake. That would probably drive me insane because
Yeah,
I,
it's really annoying.
I prefer a fast-paced environment, and I think it does have to be reviewed. It should always be a sort of a peer review process, but probably not one that takes months. One that should be sit in a room for a couple of hours, talk through it, okay, and that's it. Kind of
Yeah.
review. But obviously, yours are a lot more uh, in depth than sort of anything that I would do. So it probably does need that rigor. But no, that's fascinating. I think probably the last thing I would love to get your thoughts on is around sort of data ethics and AI itself. So when we think about the data that you work with, do you, how can I put this? When you're thinking about working in this sort of field, when you see this amount of data and you see these things, how do we make sure that we don't put our own sort of unconscious bias? So I don't really want to talk about robots and AI and the infrastructure going to take over the world and the death side of stuff. I'd rather talk about the ethics that we hold as data people to make sure that we're not applying some sort of unconscious bias. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on it.
Um, I suppose one of the most important things with sort of data ethics around what we do is probably reproducibility. So making our methodologies and things reproducible for others so that they can be, for example, assessed and built upon over time. I think this like when you tie AI into that, it depends how you're using AI. If you're using ChatGPT, for example, we know that this is quite out of date, if you're using the free version and stuff.
Mm.
So that could have an impact on how, like, how good your analysis and your script's going to be, because you might be basing it on like out of date information basically. And yeah, I think trying to keep like I think it's important to kind of try our best to, yeah, maintain, this reproducibility in order for, our methods to be appropriately checked and used by other people. So it's yeah, if there's a way of automating that with AI, then that's brilliant, and making that whole process easier and smoother, then I'm all
Mm.
for it, because I'm probably one of the worst people for like writing a script and then having, random sentences and like ridiculous like bits, I get
Yeah,
distracted halfway through and start writing absolute nonsense, and then having to fix it before I put it up on GitHub or whatever. So
yeah.
if
You
AI
are not
could
alone
script.
in that. That is a main flaw for most data people. I can tell you that now. You are not alone in that area. Yeah, I think when it comes to sort of health or any sort of personal data, if we take menopause, for example, menopausal data, is it that this might be a little bit controversial, I guess, but could a man have the same sort of impact to that data set as a woman? Would it have the same perspective? Would they ask the right questions? Would they, would they interrogate it the same way?
Uh, honestly, I don't see any reason why not. This is actually a question that people ask of me a lot, because I work in, obviously the field of menopause, and a lot of people ask me like, how can you really understand this when you've never been through it yourself?
Mm.
Which is quite an interesting one, because I haven't. I have as much knowledge of going through the menopause as, my dad. Like it's like, so I suppose it's a two-way street really, is what I'm saying. Who knows? Maybe an actually actively menopausal woman going through it would do a better job than I would. Um,
Because they would
but
identify with the symptoms, maybe.
identify with the symptoms, and also I think, there's some like quality issues in data. There always is, especially health data as well. I think, especially symptom data, we ask very broadly, um, are you experiencing sleeping problems? And someone having sleeping problems would be thinking, well, what do you mean? Do you mean, do I sleep too much? Do I not sleep enough? Do I have insomnia? Do I wake up at 3 a.m. every night?
Mm.
There's like some, I don't know, there's richness that can be found in people actively going through it.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you're right. I think that it's more than just male female question. It is sort of, have you gone through it? Could you answer that? That's an
Yeah.
interesting point. I think, yeah, I do think about that when it comes to these sorts of subjects. Me personally, I think if we are going to be completely unbiased, it shouldn't really matter who is writing the code, as long as, like you said, that it is repeatable and it is, plainly read out rather than it being
Yeah.
caveated in any way. Like, oh, I removed this subset of people because X, Y, Z. That sort of stuff happens anyway, and it shouldn't really matter if what you what you go through or what your gender is or if you've been through it or not, because the data is still the same. It doesn't matter. My headspace then goes to, well, would I have a different opinion? Would I take a different approach? That's where my head goes. If me and you were to both sit down and take the same data set, would I approach it exactly the same as you would, based on the questions that are fed in front of me?
Yeah, this is the difficulty, I guess. I think a lot of factors come into it, like your domain knowledge and things like that, I think can have a huge part to play in both a positive and negative way. You might know
Yeah.
too much in some cases, you
Yeah,
know?
that is true. Then that would then start causing that sort of unconscious bias because you
Yeah,
know too much. Maybe people who don't know anything about it and just given a plain data set would have a better scenario or a better thought process for it.
yeah.
I
I
I think
think
it's fascinating.
it is actually, yeah, because I think obviously in research, if you're aiming for a certain hypothesis to be true, then you're like, that's gonna affect the way that you analyze the data, you
Mm,
know?
yeah,
P-hacking comes to mind, stuff like that, so yeah.
yeah, that's really cool. I think the the work that you do could have such a massive impact on so many women's lives. That's really sort of inspiring to sort of for that to do, for you
Oh,
to do that sort of stuff. I think it's amazing. I think all the power to you to helping people out like that and using data in the right way. And it's not to like try and sell them something. It's try to just help them and guide people. And that's what data should be used for, not necessarily like how every other company in the world kind of uses data to try and sell you something. It's a kind of data for good piece, isn't it? What you do.
yeah, oh, thank you. Well, hopefully, yeah, it just, it
Oh, yeah, maybe, don't know.
maybe. Yeah. But, just depends on the way it's implemented and stuff. It's nice working sort of with a company that has a direct line to, menopausal women because they're more likely to be able to feed them an article and say, "Did you know that doing X, Y, and Z could help you in the future?" So
Yeah,
that's quite a nice, that's a nice thing about working with an industrial area who can, yeah, sort of influence women in a positive way and in a quick way instead of it going, you know, into, like a university draw somewhere and hopefully
mm,
getting
yeah,
discovered.
yeah. That's a good point, actually. That's a good point that it is where you are now. You're actually having an impact rather than having an academic paper that may or may not get read. That's also another good one. I like that. Um, and look, I think it's been absolutely amazing speaking to you today because I think it's really fascinating what you do, how you've got into it, and I think it's kind of inspiring for other people to know that where you started. You were a support worker, and then you went on to get a PhD. You became a data scientist, and you're doing something that has a massive impact on people's lives. That's a really inspiring story, and I hope the people that listen to this, the 10 or 20 people that tune in, uh, or maybe millions and millions now. I don't know. You know that listen to this sort of journey that you've been on because we've all had our own sort of past. And most people think, I go to school, I go to university, I get a job in a corporate company, and that's how I start my career. And it's always really fascinating and interesting to listen to people like yourself who have not had that sort of straightforward journey. You're self-taught, went and got a PhD. Not many people can do that, right? From the background you had. And that I think that's honestly absolutely amazing. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It was lovely to meet you as well.